Good evening, good afternoon. I'm Lorraine Marchand, and welcome to the Innovators Circle. I'm delighted tonight to have a guest with me, Karen D. Kaufman. We're going to have a fantastic discussion around the brand new approach to you and leadership. Let me just give you a little bit of Karen's background as we get started. So, Karen is a Master of Science and Organizational Dynamics, MSOD. She's the co-founding principal and president of the Kaufman Partnership, which was established in Philadelphia in 1986. She is a prominent executive coach and consultant to global organizations, and she has dedicated her career to accelerating the leadership, performance, and impact of executives and their talented teams. I can think of no better person to have a discussion with tonight about leadership and performance than you, Karen. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorraine.
And as we are in the middle of November, happy Thanksgiving in advance, everyone. It's a very common time to be reflecting on what we've accomplished over the last year, to start preparing for 2025. And certainly some of what we need to be thinking about is our leadership, it is our performance. It certainly brings us around to thinking about our brand and how we are perceived. So very good time for some reflective thought on these particular topics. So Karen, let's start off with your overall philosophy about how leaders of innovation are perceived versus how they wish to be perceived or think they are perceived. And I saw an interesting factoid earlier this week, and it was published by a Harvard Business Review article. And there was a massive study that was done. 15,000 individuals were evaluated on their self-awareness, whether they thought they were self-aware, which the majority of them did, versus whether they really were self-aware based on a little diagnostic that they took. And based on this diagnostic, only about 15% of people were actually self-aware. So we may give ourselves a little bit more credit than we're due to understanding ourselves, how we're being received, how we're being perceived than we actually are. And I know that this is one of your areas of expertise. We're going to talk later in the show about your assessment tool. But if you could just help us break that down a bit.
Sure. Well, first of all, I am not surprised by the study because people are blind to their biggest derailers. I was interviewed a number of years ago by the Wall Street Journal on the growth of executive coaching. And I spoke to them over a number of hours. And there was one quote, and it was that people were blind to their biggest derailers, which is why executives need executive coaches and others that they can go to where there isn't going to be any retaliation for candid feedback, because executives rarely get the candid feedback that they deserve, which would help them be more innovative and more effective.
Yeah, terrific. And can you talk with us a little bit more about this difference between the way we think we're being perceived versus how we actually are perceived, and maybe the difference between brand and reputation? I know you draw a distinction between the two.
Yes. We can think of brand and reputation as two sides of the same hand. There's a front and there's the back of our hand. So if you think about reputation, it's what others say about us based on their experience of us, based on our behaviors. It's what they say about us when we are not in the room. We have less control over what people say about us, but what we do have control over is what we say and what we do. So when we think about personal brand, and I know there's a lot of talk about personal brand, It's how you aim or how you wish to be perceived. And it's based on a lot of things. But what I don't think people realize, there are certain things that are foundational in our background, whether it's where we grew up, where we went to school, what impacted us at a young age that had us want to be the way that we are. So, for example, for me, I decided at age 14, when my parents were selling our house, and the real estate agent came in dressed in a professional suit and a portfolio, and she was professional. I had not seen a quote professional woman before that. And I decided that I wanted to be a professional woman. And that is something that's foundational in my background.
Mm.
So I think for each person, if they look at what is unique about them and then connect that to what they want to contribute in the world, why they want to do what they do. Because I think deep down, all of us want to know that who we are and what we do makes a difference. And then our personal brand is aligned with our values. Whereas our reputation is how others would describe us, and it's based on the impressions that we've made. It's their opinions about us. So when I think about innovation, we don't walk around saying I'm innovative. It's an assessment that others would have about us based on certain evidence.
And Karen and that's a terrific story. I like the one that you showed. I have a story that I share when I was 12 and being influenced by my father, who was a serial inventor, SERIAL, serial inventor, and gave me one of my first lessons on the fun of developing a new product that we ended up taking to market. And so that idea of entrepreneurship and innovation and creating something new and being fearless in terms of giving it a try is part of who I am. So I think everybody's got a story when they're 12 or 14. I always say to people, think back to when you were about 12 years old. What were you doing? What were you thinking? What did you want to be? Who influenced you? Because I think that a lot of who we become was actually established or influenced at that tender age. But is there
Absolutely.
any way that brand and reputation can become more closely aligned? Do we even want them to be more aligned? I would imagine that some people can potentially be frustrated if they work really hard on their brand, it's aligned with core values, and someone sees them in a circumstance or through a lens and ascribes impressions to them as you described. So, is there any way to make a better link between the brand that you want to represent and the impression and reputation that you might have in the public domain?
Absolutely. There was a young woman in a mentoring session last night that I did, and her boss had said to her, "You're not confident." And she went out to prove to her boss that she was confident, which reminded me when I worked in an organization in my early 20s and decided to go out on my own. And my boss said to me, "You'll never be successful with that. That's what we do here in the stores." I had a retail background, I was a buyer. And it was like, "I'll show you." So sometimes it takes the naysayers
Mm.
to be a catalyst for us to bring forth something different. The thing about impressions and reputation, people's impression of us are not always accurate. People are seeing things through their own lens. They're not always seeing things as they are. And research has shown that it takes 8 to 10 different experiences of someone to alter an initial impression.
Mm.
Now, that's not fair. It's
No.
absolutely not fair, but it doesn't mean that we have to be in the presence of that person 8 to 10 times. Someone else can represent and share their experience of us.
Wow, that's very interesting. That's a very interesting data point. 7 to 8 experiences, impressions in order to change or shift
Yes.
someone's impression. Very good.
Which
Interesting.
is why sometimes people change organizations,
Mm-hmm.
because they've reached a certain level based on people's perception of them, which
Mm-hmm.
may or may not be accurate. And this is where the organizational dynamics are at play and why organizations are complex. And I would also go so far to say that most organizations are dysfunctional, just like families are dysfunctional. So we are playing in an environment um, that's complex.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Very, very well said. And I think truly innovative individuals that determine that their perception has been made in a company, or there's not too much more that they can do to change the organization or redirect the outcome, maybe that they're predestined. Figure out a way to innovate themselves, right? Remake themselves as they go on to a new organization, and hopefully bring those learnings with them so that they can reflect and also plan how they can accommodate for blind spots or shadow impressions or whatever the case might be. Well, let's go on to your framework now, which I really
Mhm,
like a lot because in your system, you talk about 4 components. There's perceptual intelligence,
mhm,
cognitive abilities, behavioral intelligence, and emotional intelligence, which we're all familiar with,
mhm,
EQ. And that corresponds to 3 frameworks that I have in the field of innovation when it comes to individuals and social constructs, which would be IQ, SQ, and EQ. So I think your perceptual IQ and cognitive abilities kind of wrap into what I might call IQ. And then the behaviors fall into that category of SQ or social intelligence. And then, of course, emotional intelligence is EQ. But I like those 4 domains. And I was wondering if you could, maybe walk us through them a bit and how you use them in your system to help individuals assess and guide how they can develop their skills in each of those 4 domains, because that's what you do, is help them develop a greater awareness or a diagnostic of how they're performing in those 4 domains and how they can improve.
yes. Thank you. So, our system overall and why it was developed was because we used to get calls from organizations and they would say, "We have a very talented person, but they need more executive presence." And when we would dig deeper, they would say things like, "Well, they need more fire in their belly." They wouldn't really know. They would say something like, "Well, we know it when we see it." And we started to think this is not helpful for people. If people are getting feedback that they need more executive presence, but they're not getting the examples, we thought we better develop a framework to help people identify what these factors are, define the factors, and then help them develop it. So before I get into the details of the system, what it does is it does 5 things. Number one, it helps people enhance their self-awareness. And as we said from the study you shared, people think they're self-aware, but we're really not. We're not as aware as we need to be, really. Um, and then the system also helps people refine one's communication. And when we talk about communication, it's our vocal impact, it's our verbal impact, what we say, and it's also uh, visual impact. It's what people see, and we believe what we see. It helps to build trust in relationships, and we talked about improve executive presence and be more aligned with the organizational goals. So that's the larger context of the system. So as you said, the system is broken into 4 quadrants. And if people look at your newsletter, we shared that with you. It's usually just shared with our clients, but I realized we have a tool that's valuable for people. So we want to give it to people. It works best with a coach, but certainly people can do an assessment.
Mhm.
So there are 4 quadrants because it's a brain-based system. And what do I mean by that? What we see impacts how we think, impacts how we behave, and it impacts how we feel. All right? So, for example, for the benefit of our conversation in terms of being more innovative, in the perceptual factors, I selected leadership and reputation. Those are the most highly developed perceptual skills to be perceived as an innovator.
Mhm.
In the cognitive domain, I think about attitude and relevance, because an innovator has to be relevant to what the market needs, and our openness to discover what we don't know that we don't know. So that's an attitude or an openness. And when I think about the key behaviors for innovation, is our ability to speak clearly and with greater brevity. People must understand what we are conveying. And we also have to bring people along, because we may see things sooner than others see them. And we may want to, and I'm one of these people, I want to move to action all the time, but people aren't there yet, and they may have to process in the way that they process. And then I do not think we can underestimate the value of civility and manners.
Mhm.
And gossip and sarcasm kills organizations and innovation.
Mhm.
And then our persistence, our dedication, our perseverance. Most innovations fail. I remember reading something that Colonel Sanders, he went to 1,100 different places before someone accepted his recipe. You know, he didn't stop with 5 places, 1,100. So sometimes it takes that. And
Mhm.
then the last is our emotional intelligence, and I've identified here respect, our patience and tolerance. Um, I've been an entrepreneur for over 3 decades, so and some years are leaner than others, and it does take a patience and a recognition of that. And then the last one I'll identify here, and then I do have strategies around them, is enthusiasm, our passion, and our joy, because that is contagious for other people to want to implement
Mhm.
and be willing to risk making a mistake. And you and I spoke a little earlier about the fear of making a mistake in organizations and our perfectionist tendencies.
Yes, well, thank you. That's a very good overview and roundup. And I really like the way you are leaning into just so many fundamental core behaviors. We talked about values at the top of the show, and so
Mhm,
much of what you're talking about, integrity and trust and respect and civility, are just very basic values. So it's
mhm,
not hard to figure out what the method or the recipe is. It's just hard to do it on a day-to-day basis because it
yeah,
just needs so much attention and care and fostering, and we're humans, and so we can fall behind. But I do want to just highlight for a moment this idea of the innovation that an individual would like to embody. And I can say that I'm an innovative person, or I value innovation, or I want to be more innovative. And then something happens when we get into that large organization. And large organizations are designed to repeat and scale and do something in a very consistent, repeatable way. That's how they function as a whole or dysfunction. And of course, that's how they make money. But it's at odds, I think, with this idea of trying to encourage and sustain innovation at an individual and at an organizational level. And so much of it is because there's such a low tolerance for failing, making a mistake, having an accident, or doing something experimental that doesn't work out in large organizations. And I really like Jeff Bezos's methodology at Amazon, which was try, fail, learn. And when I'm talking to my students, I usually try to find a way to work in that quote because it really gets their attention. But as you've worked with so many leaders and organizations, do you have any tips or takeaways in terms of what a leader that you've seen just be very consistent in driving innovation in a large organization that was able to embody some of these values and principles, and maybe someone that wasn't so great at it? I know we didn't discuss this question, but I have a feeling that you can swing and go for it.
Yeah, I think organizations now, there's a necessity for innovation. We've just gone through a period of mergers and acquisitions, you know, growing organically, growing inorganically. Um, and then I think we can't ignore the whole AI um, wave, and I'm going to call it a wave. The biggest disruptor 25 years ago, or whenever the internet came, that was one major disruption, positive overall, but we all had to retool, reimagine who we are to become facile with some of these tools. And now with AI, we can either be afraid of it or embrace it and work with it. Why I think these factors that are so important right now in terms of developing our innovation, because they are the soft skills, and it's soft skills for hard business. So right now, our people skills, in conjunction with the new technologies, are more important than ever before. And I'll say one more thing, that what I observe in organizations is that people are hungry for connection, that people feel disconnected and they are afraid to re-engage. And I think our whole younger generation that grew up with the technology and the pandemic, we are working in organizations with some of the etiquette skills right now. What do you do at a business lunch? How do you dress? This whole casual movement, and my master's degree was on the impact of casual days for women in organizations. And once we give people some of these perks like dressing casual, how do you pull that back? So people are confused and I would say paralyzed in some ways. So this work is more important than ever before.
Really well said, and clearly we could have a much longer protracted conversation around some of these issues that you have brought up, but thank you for raising them. I know we have two more things that we'd like to cover. I wanted you just to touch on some of the aspects of your system, if you'd like to elaborate on that any further, and then I do want to make sure that we have a couple minutes to talk about the book that you've just published. So congratulations. And I did want to ask you a question or two about some of the tips and quotes in your book. But first, going back to your system, anything that you would like our viewers to know about the system? And I know people can go and look up the newsletter and certainly get more information, but maybe just a couple highlights.
Yeah, I think you do a self-assessment where you are right now. It's how you see yourself in the role, and then give it to one or two other people that you trust their input. output.
Mhm,
See
mhm.
if they are seeing you in the way that you are seeing yourself. So be an investigator of your own development.
Okay, good
Okay,
advice.
and if people write to me at kk@kpartners.com, I will send them 48 ways that they can enhance their executive presence.
Okay.
Since our show is only a half hour, and I know I wanted to give people more tips. In the book are magical nuggets. So at the end of each of the 18 chapters, there are 3 magical nuggets that if you just pick up one chapter and spend 5 minutes, you will learn and have something to improve the quality of your day.
And so I've got Karen's book here, and it's called Magic: Making a Good Impression Count on and Off the Golf Course. And maybe you can just comment on why the golf course was your metaphor for this training and leadership coaching around one's performance in your brand.
Easily. So you had mentioned earlier about focusing on yourself, and it does take focus. So playing a round of golf, you need to be present for those 4 hours. It is very difficult to do, but it is a great training in terms of being present. And I didn't pick up golf until a number of years ago. And I saw what it was like being a beginner. And as adults, we don't like to be beginners. And if we're going to innovate, it takes having a beginner mindset.
Mm.
And I started to see the compatibilities between being an effective leader, leading a successful life, and being proficient in golf. And I'm passionate about golf, passionate about our work, and I wanted a fun, readable book that people could pick up, read it for 5 minutes or read the whole thing in an hour and a half. It's only 94 pages,
Mhm.
and really um, uh, embrace and lead the kind of life that they want to lead.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you for so it's 18 holes or 18 chapters. I think one that I particularly liked, and you referenced it in terms of being a beginner and adults not liking to have to learn or not look smart in front of others, but it was just the courage to begin and having like that childlike curiosity and wonder and not being afraid to fail. And that's on hole number 5. Why is that hole number 5?
No particular reason.
Okay.
It's really no particular um it's no particular reason.
Yeah.
And you asked me earlier which hole was my favorite, and I will say the one that I par.
Okay. Spoken like a true golfer. Okay. And every day is a little different on the golf course, as we know. We have good days and bad days. And just like life and being a leader, you just have to get back out there and try again because there's no repeating what you did the day before. It's a completely different set of circumstances and it can be very different results. And on that particular hole, number 5, you have a magical nugget, which is be willing to look foolish.
Yes.
All golfers have been there, so move on. So I think that, that also requires a sense of humor, not taking ourselves too seriously. And who doesn't like to be around someone who's lighthearted, knows how to make fun of themselves? And I mean that in the best of ways,
Yes.
but, that self deprecating humor that we all find so charming and interesting about a person. So I liked that chapter and those nuggets.
Yeah. So I guess, when I think about it, I tried to make the book as sequential as possible. And it's like you're excited in the beginning. On hole number 1, everyone is very excited. By hole number 5, you kind of get to see your game that day. So I
Yeah.
guess in that way, I did have a purpose. It's allowing ourselves to be a beginner and not taking ourselves too seriously. I remember the first time I whiffed a ball and missed it completely. I looked around to see who was looking. And then I thought, that's interesting. So we have to investigate what's going on over here.
Yes, yes. Same behavior. I like to golf. It doesn't like me too much, but I'm going to continue to work on it. So, well, Karen, it's been absolutely delightful 30 minutes. I wish we had more time, but I think this has been a terrific overview and some wonderful tips that you shared with everyone. People can get the book, they can look at the newsletter, they certainly can take the assessment which you've offered. So, a lot of very helpful prescriptive items that people can walk away from this session with. So, everyone, please get in touch with Karen if some of this resonated with you. We'll be having our next Innovator Circle in December. And again, if you have any interest in being part of the Innovator Circle, please send me an email or a LinkedIn. Would love to hear your story, your case example, and include you in this wonderful and growing circle that Karen is part of.
Thank you for being so prepared. You're a wonderful interviewer as well as conversationalist, and I valued and had fun today. Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Thank you, Karen. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
And here's Lorraine's book. Don't
Oh.
forget to pick that up as well. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.